So welcome everybody to this Trees and Design Action Group seminar on resilience through planning for trees. As you'll all know, but I'll just repeat for any new people, TDAG is a network and a forum that brings people and organizations together to support the role of urban trees through better collaboration in the planning, design, construction, management and maintenance of our urban places. And evidence-based information is really important to us. And so the presentations today were always trying to have knowledge exchange and cross-sector working. And so to you, the audience, please do put your questions and participate. And I would just end by thanking the partners on this event, the Arboricultural Association, the Institution of Highway Engineers, the Landscape Institute, the Town and Planning Association, and the Urban Design Group. So I will now introduce our chair for the day. We're very pleased we have Jane Findlay with us. She is, as you probably know, the founding director of FIRA and also past president of the Landscape Institute, an experienced urban planner, designer of the public realm, and she's been really passionate through her career promoting the psychological and physical benefits that quality landscape design plays in all aspects of the public realm and puts placemaking at the center of her work, as I hope we all do, using the public realm to define the character of a new development or to redefine the character of an existing urban area. So having said all that, I think Jane is very well qualified to chair this discussion. So Jane, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Sue, and good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this TDAG webinar on resilience through planning for trees. I'm delighted to be here this afternoon, and thank you, Sue, for inviting me to chair this session. I'm a landscape architect by background, and over the years, I've had the privilege of working across the public, private and charitable sectors, designing, advising and advocating for landscapes that deliver multiple benefits. I've run a practice, I've served as president of the Landscape Institute, and now I focus much of my time on championing the power of landscape to address the interconnected challenges of climate change, biodiversity loss, and public health. I'm also a trustee of the Earth Trust, which is doing vital work to demonstrate how land can be managed for both people and nature. And I serve as a landscape advisor to the National Memorial Arboretum, a place where trees and meaning come together to create spaces of reflection, memory, and resilience. These roles continue to deepen my belief in the importance of long-term thinking and joined-up planning when it comes to green infrastructure, and particularly trees. Because while many of us here recognise the essential value of trees, whether for cooling our cities, improving air quality, supporting biodiversity, reducing flood risk, or supporting mental and physical well-being, the systems that support their long-term success are not always in place. And that's exactly what today's seminar will explore. We'll be asking, do we need to adopt tree strategies or urban forest plans that give planners the tools to prioritise trees and green infrastructure in development decisions? Could this also provide a level playing field for developers, enabling them to factor in the costs and benefits of trees right from the start rather than treating them as optional extras? Should tree officers be embedded within planning departments to improve cross-sector collaboration and influence from the outset? And how do we ensure that tree planning conditions are properly enforced? And crucially, how do we secure the necessary aftercare and monitoring so that trees planted with the best of intentions don't fail for the lack of maintenance, clarity, or funding? These are big, complex questions, but also very practical ones. The answers will shape how we move from policy to practice, from ambition to delivery. And I'm looking forward to hearing from our expert speakers and from all of you as we unpack these issues together. So please do add your comments and questions to the chat box, and I'll be inviting you to put your hands up later to ask questions yourself. So thank you for joining us. Let's get started. And to our first speaker this afternoon, I'd like to welcome Eugene McGee, as a tree officer and now a PhD student who will give an overview of resilient adopted tree strategies. So Eugene, over to you. You can switch your microphone on as well, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. Thank you very much. And thanks for everybody to joining today. I don't know what it's like where you are, but in London, it's very, very hot. We've had an exceptionally dry spring, so very relevant time to be talking about climate resilience, resilience in general, and the role of urban forest strategies in that. So my name's Eugene McGee. I've been working with trees for the last 15 years. For the last 5 years as a tree officer in London for Hammersmith and Fulham. And as of October 24, I'm a first year PhD student at the University of Birmingham. So I'm coming at this question from a kind of a tree officer practitioner perspective and also a researcher perspective. And hopefully I'll be able to, bear with me, there we go, address some of these questions. So I'd like to look at what are tree strategies, why do we need them, and how can they be utilised to build resilience through planning. Then I'll give a brief overview of a research project based on what is the role of urban forest strategies in climate resilience. I'd also like to take this opportunity to ask you a few questions. There's a Slido QR code in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. That'll be on the next slide as well. But it's just a good opportunity to get some insights from you as well. Maybe Dee, you could put the answers to that in the chat box at the end. We might have a chance to talk about that later. Yeah, so what are tree strategies and why do we need them? Literature suggests that they are a tool to help bring together stakeholders for a kind of collective and strategic targets. I quite like this definition because it avoids defining the structure or the content or the format of a tree strategy, because what I found is in London alone, we've got strategies, we've got tree policies, tree planting strategies, management strategies, green infrastructure strategies, and green-blue infrastructure strategies. So lots of different formats, but all of which have this kind of combined aim of bringing stakeholders together, defining aims and visions. And for that reason, we shouldn't exclude the different, or we shouldn't try to define tree strategies as a particular name. So why do we need them? Traditionally, urban forest populations have been managed very reactively in a kind of firefighting way, but tree strategies move towards something a lot more proactive. So that's kind of proactive measures, strategic aims that can lead to effective tree protection, maximizing climate change adaptation, and reducing costs of management. Just to scale out and put that in a kind of broader context, there's a little snapshot in the bottom right, bottom corner there from the London Urban Forest Plan, which covers all of London. The uptake of urban forest strategies is a performance indicator that they've outlined. So it's not just about the kind of localized effects of tree strategies, it's about adopting them to contribute to the broader agenda. So yeah, I kind of summarize this for this presentation as tree strategies are also an opportunity to embed resilience measures and tools. So a little bit about that. In true local authority style, when developing a tree strategy, which was one of my tasks in my previous position, it was looking around, looking at what's been done well, looking at your neighbours, looking at lessons learned, and borrowing things and sharing things. And so I'm just going to look around and look at some of the kind of shine a spotlight on some of the tools that I've noticed, and I think are really effective ways of bringing resilience and through planning. Here's Hackney's spatial framework. So this is a map which overlays planning designations and green infrastructure assets, blue infrastructure assets, for the use of developers during kind of pre-application stage and throughout the development process, as well as for council officers to kind of refer to when making their decisions. So This is embedded within the green infrastructure strategy. It's something that a developer can refer to prior to submitting an application, and it ultimately kind of increases or improves the success, improves the quality, and increases the success of planning applications. Another one that you might be familiar with is the Bristol tree replacement strategy. This is a little bit older now, but I know there's talks about adapting this to more accurately reflect the kind of replacement that we're looking for in BNG and mechanisms like that. But this is ultimately kind of adopted at a political level, so developers can look to this, and they know if they're going to propose to remove a certain amount of trees, they know what they can expect to be to replace. That's not necessarily the number of trees, that could be the value of the number of trees. So it's always in the kind of the council are looking to increase their compensation for trees lost, ultimately expanding their canopy cover and all the resilience that that brings, whilst also improving the success rate of good planning applications. Another one is CAVA, it's capital value assessment of trees. This is kind of accepted by a lot of different councils now. It's another way of compensating for lost trees, typically accepted by local authorities, and that kind of embedded nature means that developers can expect to be replacing trees substantially. It's not an exhaustive list of the planning tools that are available. We know, the urban greening factor and BNG and things are becoming more and more embedded in policy and obviously mandated. But yeah, that's just a kind of spotlight on some of the tools that I've noticed during my kind of reviewing process. So it's not just tools that we can embed into our tree strategies, it's principles and concepts. There's a lot of support coming, a lot more support coming from the top down now. This is a project delivered by the London Urban Forest Partnership, based on forest resilience, urban forest resilience, and as well as kind of species vulnerability and maps and all kinds of other support. They've developed these principles which highlight kind of resilience measures and things that local authorities should be embedding in their tree strategies to kind of promote resilience. So most strategies do take on these principles, but it's certainly something that I think there's value in fully adopting these and embedding them within your tree strategies. Just another kind of reference to the kind of support that's out there for local authorities in developing tree strategies. This is a kind of in chronological order, and I think the move is moving to more resilience measures. The references to these can be shared. I just thought I would share this before moving on to a kind of the other aspect of this presentation, which is an insight into an overview of my research project. So again, it's solely looking at the role of urban forest strategies in climate resilience. The rationale being that we know that trees provide nature-based solutions to climate resilience, and we know that urban forest strategies improve the management of trees. So it's about assisting practitioners and bridging that gap between climate science and urban forest governance, improving the quality of urban forest strategies, and just understanding the relationship between adopted strategies and climate outcomes. So it's an ongoing project. At the moment, I'm phase one. What is the content of existing urban forest strategies? This was last done in 2022. A lot can happen in 3 years, especially in the current political climate. So I'm looking at this again to kind of update that and come from a climate resilience angle. Further down the line, I'll be looking at the evidence that kind of proves or disproves that urban forest strategies and trees are a nature-based solution to climate resilience, and ultimately what should be included in an effective urban forest strategy. So the phase one of that is based on a inductive coding exercise. So at the moment, it's a London-centric pilot with a view to scale this up into a UK-wide analysis and potentially further. This is basically going through existing strategies with a fine-tooth comb, seeing what they're addressing, what the content is, and eventually, hopefully, scaling this up using AI machine learning to address, to increase the kind of catchment area. This is a little snapshot of the coding framework that I'm using. This is just the aims section. You've got the kind of parent codes here, which are the, in this case, the general aims. Subcodes, in this example, I've zoomed in on the aims targeting climate resilience, and the references themselves that I've took from the strategies which have been coded to those particular things. So from this, I've been able to understand which tree strategies are most targeting climate resilience, and beginning to build some kind of understanding of the content of the existing tree strategies. Yeah, so like I said, it's early stages of the research. Some initial observations that I've made is that since 2020, there's been an uptake of 15% in tree strategies. So that's good. That's looking good for the KPIs outlined in the London Urban Forest Plan. There's a particular absence of formally adopted documents in the east of the city. And operational urban forest strategies and green infrastructure strategies appear to be more likely to target climate resilience. So on the right there, that's just a kind of a graph showing the percentage coverage in each of the strategies that target, with aims that target climate resilience. Below that is what's called the hierarchical chart. The most common aim was to expand canopy cover, and you can see the kind of aims targeting climate resilience just to the right, slightly less common. Yeah, so this is just a kind of a graphic to demonstrate that, you know, there's areas that don't have tree strategies. That does not mean that they're not performing well. It doesn't mean that they're either more susceptible to the adverse effects of climate change. It doesn't mean that they're more resilient to it. I think I just like to refer to this to kind of imagine that urban forests don't have borders, and it's important to consider the urban forest as a whole and not be limited by borders. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm concluding. If it's okay, I'll just kind of signpost to another project that I'm involved in. This is the Cost Action INTUF, Integrative Approach of Urban Forestry. It's a European project. At the moment, we're calling for submissions for tree strategies, urban forest management plans, et cetera, from all over Europe. So if you've got any good examples or any examples whatsoever, it'd be really nice if we could see some submissions. There's a Gmail email address there. Feel free to submit them there, and I can share this afterwards. Thank you.
Dale, that was spot on. My alarm's just gone off, so thank you very much for your concise presentation. That was fantastic, and is a really good way to kick off this webinar. Sue, I don't know if we've got any questions that we would like to put to Eugene.
Well, I don't know if it's, Eugene, if it's really one for you, but Andrea's raised this endless thing that native trees are too often required by planning authorities. And yet we all know that native trees aren't necessarily the most resilient for many urban situations. So, you know, how on earth does anybody collectively know how we deal with this one? It's sort of got itself embedded and it's not really necessarily the best solution.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult conundrum which we face quite a lot, but I think it's about bringing the research behind that into the hands of the practitioners and educating the people that are dealing with this situation. And there's a lot of work coming out of Kew, and also that the London Urban Forest Resilience Project has a lot of information about climate resilient species and stuff. And believe it or not, that they're not native species, as we all know. But now we have the research to push back, or at least approach that from a kind of evidence-based or evidence-led kind of perspective. So it's about getting that research into the hands of practitioners, in my opinion.
There's an interesting comment from Nola O'Donnell about that, saying that the problem is the local authority planners and ecologists demand natives, and that's something that I've come across a lot. And you know, planting native trees in streets aren't always the best trees, even taking out into account climate change. The shape and the size of them make them very difficult to integrate into the urban realm.
So
Okay.
there weren't any other pressing questions anyway.
No, that's fine. Okay. Thank you, Sue, and thank you, Eugene. We'll move on now to our next speaker. So I'd like to welcome Dale Mortimer, who's the chair of the London Tree Officers Association and the tree service manager at the London Borough of Ealing, who's going to explore the role of tree officers in planning, but especially on the critical role for success and long-term resilience of asset management. So Dale, over to you. Thank you.
Can you see that screen?
Yeah, it's just coming up. Thank you.
Is that okay?
Perfect.
Okay, well, thank you for having me this afternoon. Thank you for the invitation to speak at this seminar. I'm also in London in the heat. I don't know whether we're enjoying the heat island effect or putting up with it at the moment. But anyway, it's warm. So I'm going to give you a brief introduction to my team, the roles that the tree service plays in Ealing Council. I'll talk a little bit about the Ealing tree strategy, the policies within the strategy, the planning policies that we use on a daily basis. I'll briefly touch on how we use those policies in development planning, some of the planning conditions we've created and kind of enhanced over the years, and then some of the many challenges that we face along the way. So I'm very lucky to have recruited quite substantially in the last 6 years after some pretty severe cuts 10 years ago. We've now got 4 tree officers at Ealing. They're very different characters with different skill sets, but they all share a kind of love for trees and a passion, I think, for the urban forest and green infrastructure. So the tree officers, we split the borough geographically, so they have a small geographical area each that they manage the highways, parks, and housing trees. Within that, we also do schools, car parks, and just about everything else that the council maintains. So if there's anything to do with trees, it kind of lands on these guys' desk. They're responsible for all asset management, so for all the contractor management, the liaison with the public, and maintaining the trees essentially. They've also got additional specific tasks, and this is where the planning comes in. So 2 of them manage development site consultations. So that's split geographically across the borough. One working in the east, one in the west, responding to planning department on behalf of trees. And then one of them advises and processes the conservation areas and TPOs. That's the borough-wide task. And the 4th one undertakes surveying and assists with insurance claims. So we're very fortunate to have a tree strategy, which I wrote quite proudly way back in 2013. Unfortunately, that is the latest version, though. It would have been nice to have updated it in 2018 or 19 or any date since. But I quite simply haven't had the time. It's been on my to-do list for 7 years. That said, it's still very, very current, very relevant. Every day we use the management policies within it. They guide our decision making. They kind of justify decisions we make, sometimes difficult ones with members of the public demanding all kinds of things. And I think they give some clarity to developers as to how we're going to respond to applications and things. So there's 5 planning policies within the strategy, and the strategy was after quite a considerable push, it was adopted and ratified by full council. So although it isn't embedded in planning policy, I think the fact that it went through full council and through scrutiny certainly gave it some weight and some kudos within the local authority. So there's 5 planning policies written within the strategy. I won't read them all out to you, but there's one around removal, replacement of protected trees. They're as much kind of commitments, I suppose, or as they are policies. It kind of embeds what the council's going to do and how the public should expect us to respond, I suppose. There's one about private trees, development proposals, tree information required for development applications, tree planting on development sites generally. Yeah, I mean, you can read through those at your leisure. And then compensatory tree planting off-site. Slightly controversial one at the bottom there. The if tree planting within the site is not possible, then we do consider taking compensatory funds to mitigate the loss of amenity off-site. So the policies establish the principles for decision making. The use of CAVAT, as in the 5th policy there, to assess the amenity value of existing and proposed tree cover. And then we look really, well, the expectation is always that the developer will address the balance within the development site. But all too often in urban Ealing, certainly, things are built to the perimeter of the site. The pressure on land is huge, and they seem very reluctant to fill it with trees. So I think for developers, the option of offsetting amenity in the local area does give them a way out. It does make awkward sites viable. It also brings up its own challenges, because sometimes there are incredibly valuable trees that that we push to be retained, and then we have a discussion. But yeah, it's a tool we use frequently. So development planning is responding to trees and considering trees is a legal requirement under the Town and Country Planning Act. Local authorities obviously have a duty to consider trees and, where possible, retain trees and promote tree planting and keep trees within the locality and within the development site. The tree service. So some of the initial challenges we had when I arrived here in 2012 was that many of the planners didn't even know the tree service existed, or quite what our role was. So it's important that if you're like us providing a kind of consultancy service to planning, you make sure you get to know all of the planners, and there are quite a few of them, and they do change quite frequently. So it's about getting known and making sure that when they're looking over their applications that they do consider trees and they do consult us, which was a big challenge in the early years. Once consulted, it's important that you request, obviously, all the necessary arboricultural information hopefully prior to any planning approval being granted. We, as a service, slipped up many occasions where we were kind of forced at the last minute to write tree protection measures into conditions without having these documents to hand prior to the application being granted. Then you're kind of on a back foot trying to peddle around how can we maintain this tree and get these services in and build this here. So it's really important that you get those documents up front in advance of anything being granted, really, because you hold all the cards at that point. As ever, the devil's in the detail. Site level changes. These, in my experience, are hard to see sometimes on applications. When you're looking at a plan, you may not appreciate that the levels on the site existing and proposed are going to change. We've come unstuck many times on front garden walls. Every effort is made to maintain the trees and keep the trees. The whole building goes up, and then at the last minute, somebody hacks through a load of roots building a front garden wall. It's devastating. This is a good, bad example, I guess. This is both instances really here. The levels on the site obviously changed. You can see where the tree levels were. The site dropped by about 2 foot all the way across. So that in itself was bad. And then to make matters worse, they excavated for this lovely garden wall, kind of retaining wall all the way around, hacked off all the roots. Yeah. More recently, attenuation tanks, as everyone seeks to conserve water and do good things, they're becoming a bit of a nuisance in that they're not always clearly shown on plans. They too can sometimes go in at the last minute, and and perhaps not where you think they're going to be. And the old favourite service runs always need to be aware of where the service runs are going to access the site. This is another good bad example. They built those new buildings very well, had loads of ground protection all the way through there, and then came at the end to put in a 2-inch water main and hack through all those roots. So job well done there. Yeah, it just never fails to amaze me, really. So we have monitoring conditions. This is something we've changed as well over the last few years. We've got a 2-part monitoring condition. So the first one kind of sets out what the expectations are of the developer. We ask for all of this. And then the second part is about following it up, really. So the follow-up details to be submitted. So throughout the project, any changes in significant works around trees, the lead arboriculturist will submit photos following the visits. And then at the end, this is probably the most useful one we have, I would suggest at the moment. Within 3 months of first use, the developer must submit all of the monitoring and an assessment of the remaining trees, or the trees that are to be retained, and any remedial action and anything else that needs to be done. And obviously we don't have to sign that off until we're happy. So that is an extremely useful tool. I would suggest if authorities out there don't have this kind of end of play condition, that you might want to think about implementing that. It's something, like I said, we didn't used to have, but it's so valuable now. And then we've got tree protection conditions. I won't go into read all those. Essentially, obviously, if anything's destroyed or damaged, it gets replaced. Anything destroyed or damaged that wasn't supposed to be has to be replaced with its caveat value, the full caveat value. So there's no shortcuts in submitting an application that suggests it's going to retain all the trees, and then later on you find out that it's impossible to build and 4 of them are coming out, and then it's too late to agree any mitigating compensation or anything else. That's nicely tied up in that condition there. Does it always go to plan? Of course it doesn't. Does it ever? So common problems, compaction, usually because protection measures have been moved. Sometimes they haven't even gone in. This is quite, I wouldn't say it's typical, but this situation you see too often. Essentially, they'd started work, demolition, with no tree protection measures whatsoever. Pretty much gutted the house. There's a kitchen sink there even. There's tracks all across here. They've been using a mini digger to go under the canopy, I guess, to move all the rubble around. So yeah, it does go wrong, and then you have to look at ways of mitigating it. I think we've actually, I think they're actually going to be doing some terror venting around that, and they complied quite quickly. To be fair, once they were alerted to their error. Trees not listed on the application. This, I don't know whether it's deliberate or whether it's just an oversight, but very often we'll get an application. I think this was a rear extension of this property. They didn't fail to mention the fact there was a mature lime tree 3 meters from the foundations of the building. And I think, I don't know whether it was this case or in some of the cases previously, our own planners have also not noticed, or maybe they didn't go to site. And anyway, the tree that's gone in, they're pumping concrete in there at the moment, or at that time. And we will have to see. We'll have to see how that lime tree does. Yeah, watch this space. Development beyond planning consent. Yeah, this doesn't happen that often, but this instance here, they had permission to excavate for a basement, which is almost where the photograph was taken. And well, at the time I thought they'd just got carried away and had gone all across the garden. They'd actually excavated a similar sized plot next to it, and then put retaining wall around the whole lot. It turned out that they were splitting the site, selling one plot, and then they're going to sell the plot later on. So rather sneakily had excavated prior to any planning. I've got some questions for the audience, if anyone can assist. Tree bonds are something that we've discussed. This is AI. According to AI, that's what a tree bond is. I don't know if anyone else, any other local authorities or even consultants have had experience of tree bonds being used to protect trees either on or adjacent to development sites. How they've worked. How long can you hold a bond for? I like the idea of, if there's a really special tree on the site, we'd take the caveat value off of someone and we'd hold it for 5 years until we're happy that that tree has survived the development. But I don't know if that's possible. And then lastly, I think this is always said, how can we improve post-development aftercare? We've got the condition around 5 years, but ensuring tree protection for minimum 5 years. But in reality, can we go back 5 years? Can we go back 4 years later? Who do we chase? The developer's long gone. He sold the flats. He sold the property. So I welcome any thoughts on what we can do about post-development aftercare. And I don't know whether I'm ahead or behind, but that's
I think
me.
you're just about a little bit overrun. So if we stop it there, Dale, that'd be
Okay.
great. Yeah. I think some of those points that you've just brought up on that last slide would be good to hold on to those for discussion once all the speakers have been through. But can I just ask you a quick question? Sue put up in the questions right at the beginning about did Ealing get positive political buy-in with the iTree survey? Has this helped to get support for trees?
It certainly made it certainly made an impression, I think, on the public. We had I think one of the best things we did was we hung the tree values on all of the trees down the high street, and it created a bit of a storm because people thought it was a protest to retain the trees and that the council were going to remove them. And it was amazing how many people I think were kind of shocked by the value of the trees, but also how many kind of came forward and supported, argued for the trees. So the iTree itself has gone down very well with the councillors, and it's kind of referred to quite a bit. It quickly becomes outdated as well, unfortunately.
Your presentation is really interesting, and it's quite depressing to see the pictures that you've showed in the second part of your presentation around the damage that's often committed quite sort of arbitrarily, even if protection has been in place. Do you think that is normally does that happen on small schemes more often, or are the larger developers just as much to blame? And do you think that the damages that you could enforce are severe enough to actually deter developers from doing it again on the next project?
So I'd say we've got quite a lot of good developers in Ealing. So the larger ones, I think, have probably learned over the years. You tend not to come across the tree service twice, I don't think, because we can cause quite a lot of problems. Although the financial penalties are quite small, the enforcement team can stop work on site. For larger companies, that's incredibly painful. If they might shut down a site, it costs them thousands of pounds a day. For smaller projects, I think there'll always be a challenge because I think people will always try and take that chance and cut that corner if they can. Yeah.
It's really a funny story. They're building an extension to the school opposite my house with lots of trees on it, and of course I've been keeping a very close eye on them. And when they digressed from their planning drawings, they were rather shocked to find they had a landscape architect for them, and they were a reputable contractor as well. So great. Well, that's a fantastic presentation you've just given us, Dale. Thank you very much for that. And we'll move on to our next speaker, who I'd like to welcome Joanna Davis, who is an arboricultural officer with Cambridge City Council, who's going to talk to us about a holistic approach for trees encompassing planning, asset management, strategy and engagement. So hello, Joanna. Are you there? I can't see. Is she there? Have we lost her? Oh, there she is. Thank you. Hello, Joanna.
Sorry, that took a little while for some reason to come up.
That's all right. Hi, right, over to you. Thank you.
Okay, lovely. Thank you, Jane. I am Joanna Davis, as said, an arboriculturalist with a, sorry, I just need to close a window that is in my way. I'll get rid of it somehow. A background in consultancy and also local authority tree officer, but predominantly relating to planning. I'm aiming to give a brief overview of the benefits of urban forestry as opposed to the more traditional arboricultural approaches to tree stock management. So why is this important? Well, trees play a vital role in the health, social framework and economic sustainability of a city. There is ample research showing the benefits associated with trees, so I don't think I need to go into detail. But there are also challenges associated with tree management. While trees can help mitigate climate change itself can cause problems. While it may lead to improved growth in some species, conversely, increased occurrences of drought and or flood can lead to increased tree losses. This really does go back to the question before, or relates to the question before, with regards to native species. If we're going to, have healthy tree canopies, the species we plant must be able to cope with changes in climate. And there aren't actually that many native species, depending on your definition of native, but there aren't that many species of native trees. So we do need to be looking at, in my opinion, trees that are beneficial to native wildlife rather than just native species. So also we've got hotter, drier summers may increase stress, making trees more susceptible to infection, but climate change may also improve environmental conditions for pests and diseases, allowing new ones in and lengthening the life cycle of existing resident pests and diseases. With regard to development, so in Cambridge, the population of Cambridge was estimated to grow from 132,000 in 2014 to 155,000 by 2036. As well as new housing requirements, the number of jobs is forecast to increase, along with the businesses and industries that support them. There is significant pressure to meet housing targets and to approve research and development applications in Cambridge, with other constraints to be considered, like site shape, size and location, building height, restrictions, and neighbours, sustainability and BNG, etc. The space for tree retention and new tree planting is ever decreasing. So clearly, space required for development competes considerably with canopy cover aspirations. Larger trees, older trees are underrepresented in Cambridge. Fewer than 2% are over 20 metres or have a DBH larger than 60 centimetres. And the majority of trees, 75%, are smaller than 45 centimetre DBH. Trees take decades to make a meaningful contribution to canopy cover. And this is, and relative to this, new development is short-lived. In Cambridge, we have seen the removal of 20, 30-year-old trees that were planted as mitigation for previous development being removed to accommodate new development. But between 2008 and 2018, overall canopy cover increased by 0.5%. This was mostly due to the growth of medium and larger canopy trees. This increase cannot be sustained, and the potential benefits of trees will not be realised if trees are continually removed prematurely. Increased densification creates more conflicts between trees and buildings, resulting in nuisance or inconvenience that can lead to additional tree losses. As with local authorities, other local authorities, Cambridge is continuing to face significant budgetary pressures. Without adequate funding, tree management must be prioritised, with health and safety generally being at the top of the list. More aspirational goals tend to fall by the wayside. Many local authorities have separate teams for management of public trees and the management of their statutory responsibilities associated with private trees. With ever decreasing resources, this creates communication difficulties. Other authorities use private companies for the management of trees, and this again creates communication issues and creates opportunities for aspirational aims to be overlooked. In view of the benefits and challenges associated with tree management, it is essential for councils, in my opinion, to set out their approach to tree management and protection. By moving towards a more integrated approach to tree management, councils can extend the scope of their policies beyond that which relates solely to the management of its own assets and the fulfillment of its statutory responsibilities, to include policies that recognise and enhance the overall environmental benefits of all urban trees, regardless of ownership, while also bolstering existing policies aimed at enhancing canopy cover. So urban forestry, which is generally practiced more in mainland Europe and the US, is distinct from arboriculture in that it provides for the consideration of the cumulative benefits of an entire tree population across a town or city, regardless of ownership. Looking holistically at the urban forest and its associated benefits allows for consideration of the broader issues of climate change and population growth that can be influenced by and that can affect an urban forest. Over 75% of land in Cambridge is privately owned, with the average city canopy cover being 17%. This changes ward by ward, ranging from 13% to 21.1%, with the west of Cambridge having the greatest coverage. Of the 17% canopy cover, about 16 is in city council ownership. About 10 is in the highway authority ownership. These trees are also managed by city, though, through a service level agreement. So just over a very significant 74% is in private ownership. Without proactive management of this private tree stock being a contributing factor to Cambridge canopy cover, the city would have a very different character. So I'd like to focus now on how urban forestry and a robust adopted tree strategy can help maintain and, where necessary, enhance canopy cover on private land. So firstly, through statutory powers, the National Planning Policy Framework sets out the government's planning policies to achieve sustainable development in relation to economy, social well-being, and the environment. The Cambridge Local Plan sets out the way in which the development needs of Cambridge will be met and contains policies that will influence the management of trees in the future. In addition to other environmental policies within the local plan, the specific tree policy states that development will be permitted which avoids felling, significant surgery, and potential root damage to trees of amenity or other value, unless there are demonstrable public benefits accruing from the proposal which would outweigh the current and future amenity of the trees. But as with the Town and Country Planning Act, amenity value is not defined, and the government has advised authorities to develop their own methods for assessing amenity value, taking account of visibility, individual and collective and wider impact. This has been done within the adopted Cambridge Citywide Tree Strategy. Being able to assess trees in relation to the abundance of benefits they offer, not just focusing on the visual benefits, allows for greater value to be attributed to trees, and so providing planning officers and members with the means to secure the retention of valuable trees and provide for sustainable replacement, new planting associated with the new development. The tree strategy values amenity based on 5 criterion: visual amenity, individual, collective, and wider impact; atmospheric, climate change, biodiversity, historical or cultural value, and botanical value. These criteria are also used when TPOs are challenged. But how does it all fit together? Having a research-based tree strategy that evidences the need for increased canopy cover justifies the need for a wide range of policies for different actions, all aimed at enhancing the urban forest. For example, policy P1 goes beyond some standard amenity assessments, especially with regards to tree preservation orders. E1 and E2 are useful in both asset management and in association with the local plan in securing sufficient space for trees of stature in all new development and improving planting palettes. We frequently see proposed development plans that lack space for large trees. This policy, in conjunction with the local plan policies, encourages development that makes space for large trees as part of their design layouts and not just fill in the leftover gaps, frequently too small for trees of stature. The space for large trees needs to be in sustainable locations that can be protected through future development to allow trees the time to achieve their full potential. E4 allows for further research and citizen science, while E5 and E6 endorse the commitment to public engagement. With 77% of the land and the greater percentage of canopy cover in private ownership, Cambridge City Council has limited land on which to plant trees, so the urban forest would be very sparse if council managed trees and parks were the only places trees grew. The council's regulatory responsibilities set out in the Town and Country Planning Act and associated regulations affecting private property certainly help to maintain cover in these areas, but they can't fully bridge the potential sparsity gap because they deal largely with reactive preservation and replacement planting and not with proactive management, including the considered management of declining tree stock and succession planting or even new planting where space allows. Ultimately, therefore, a robust tree stock and in turn a healthy canopy relies on the support of homeowners, businesses, volunteers, and landowners. With an holistic urban forest approach to management, a council can influence arboricultural enhancement and encourage proactive management of private land to help tree cover through improving awareness and education. Trees are not just amenities, they are assets that pay dividends in terms of their social, environmental, and economic benefits when well managed. Educating the wider community involves not only informing them about the importance and benefits of trees, but also how and where they can help make their own contribution by planting trees on their own land, joining together to plant trees in schools, hospitals, etc., or helping to maintain public tree assets. Taking responsibility and self-protecting the urban forest at a neighbourhood level. Creating partnerships with institutions such as the universities here in Cambridge and other large landowners is one way of contributing to canopy cover targets. Business partners can be very useful, contributing to the enhancement of the urban forest through either financial support or planting trees on commercial property. Some businesses, such as nurseries and garden centres, for example, have a direct stake in the urban forest, while others may be interested in offsetting their environmental impacts. However, as a significant proportion of land in Cambridge is residential, it is essential to encourage tree planting and management at the residential level through education and improving awareness. But the carrot approach is only possible with the help of volunteers and external funding. External funding, certainly at the levels required, would not be possible, in my opinion, without a robust tree strategy. Stakeholders need to be confident that their contributions will result in meaningful enhancement and that funding will be well managed to achieve the desired results. The Cambridge Urban Forest Strategy is guided by 4 interconnected principles: enhancing the resources, whether knowledge, funding, or personnel, to enable improved engagement, protection, and planting of trees. Increasing the number of trees planted across the city through a variety of initiatives and partnerships, improving the care, maintenance, safeguarding and long-term retention of existing trees, including through formal protections such as tree preservation orders and planning conditions, involving residents, stakeholders and partners in supporting the management, planting and protection of the urban forest. These principles are inherently interlinked and mutually reinforcing, with Cambridge City Council serving as the lead agency for urban forest delivery. So finally, here are some examples of partnerships and funded projects, many of which would not have been possible without the tree strategy. The Cambridge Canopy project was a pilot for the Nature Smart Cities Across Two Seas project and was delivered through funding and partnership with academic institutions and other small to mid-sized local authorities. It aimed to increase tree canopy cover in the city to help the city adapt to climate change, and part of the canopy cover project, the neighbourhood canopy campaign and the iTree project were also launched. The Canopy campaign targets tree planting in underserved communities. This is an ongoing project. The iTree Eco project is a completed citizen science project with residents, Anglia Ruskin University, Forest Research and Tree Economics to quantify the benefits that trees bring to the local ecosystem. The council has also developed Free Trees for Babies, encourages planting on private land, which is an ongoing project internally financed, and the Ash Tree Hunt, which is a community mapping and ash dieback project with Anglia Ruskin University that is ongoing. We also have a project on hold mapping citywide tree data using a Curio app. So through the local authority, treescape and urban tree challenge funds, we have received funding for tree replacement and one microwood project, a couple in partnership with the county council and new planting in priority areas. We have a partnership with Trees for Streets, supporting the sponsorship and awareness campaigns among residents and businesses. We have received contributions from Coronation Living Heritage Fund, which supports micro wood development and tree planting, and National Lottery Climate Action Fund in partnership with Cambridge Past, Present and Future. This project actually raises awareness of urban forestry, promotes biodiversity along the River Cam, and includes artistic collaboration with Cambridge Curiosity and Imagination, alongside sustainable management efforts for veteran trees on both public and private land. Thank you very much for listening. I hope it has been interesting, if a little wordy, but I'm open to any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joanna. That was really interesting, and I'd be interested to hear a bit more about how the sort of public-private collaboration can happen to promote tree planting, but not just the tree planting, but the management and subsequent maintenance that's required. I know creating the street tree group do a lot of that sort of work, and I've seen them very active on Twitter this last week, asking people to go and water their trees outside their homes, which I went out and did this morning. So it has an impact. Sue, are there any questions you'd like? Because I think you had one.
Well, I started up, I was interested in this whole question of nuisance, is that because there's not enough investment in design? Liam's kindly offered the 4 categories of private nuisance, but I just wondered if in reality, nuisance is stretched in some situations to actually basically say, can we get rid of this tree, please? It's in my way and I want to put my building there. Or do planning officers stick rigidly to the categories that Liam has kind of identified?
Well, I think in terms of nuisance, there's obviously the legal sense of nuisance, which has a financial implication. That's not a financial implication. So your own tree can't be a financial implication to you, but a tree could have a financial implication to a neighbour, and in that sense, you have the legal nuisance. Generally speaking, I don't use the word nuisance. I put it in because I try to use the word inconvenience, because that's basically what most of the situations are. But sometimes inconveniences can be extreme. you know, it isn't really a nuisance, but yes, it's a significant inconvenience. And even if a local authority has a fairly strong attitude towards inconvenience and the preservation of trees, there is always the opportunity to appeal, and the Secretary of State might not have the same attitude as local authority tree officers.
I liked your response, if I can just say, about not necessarily native trees, but actually trees that actually are friendly to local wildlife, because that's kind of then brings you into the whole biodiversity value of the trees you're looking at.
Yes, I think so. I mean, it's something that I've asked for a long time, and is sort of, yes, basically highlighted that trees need to be beneficial to local wildlife, in order for them to provide the full benefits to flora and fauna that they can. There was I did see a question pop up with regards to BNG, and it can be very difficult. I mean, it is not can be, it is very difficult on some sites to reach BNG without using only native species. So if you're if you are wanting to put in additional tree species, you have to find the space for that, and sometimes it's difficult enough just to put the trees in to meet the BNG standard. So there is definitely a problem there, and I think there's definitely work to be done on both BNG and providing a appropriate space that BNG can be achieved, but also a diverse tree species palette can be used.
Right, that's great. Thank you.
That's all the urgent questions. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Sue. I think we'll move on to the next speaker. So thank you very much, Joanna. That was a really good presentation, and we'll come back to you later there's loads of questions for you in the chat box, so we'll come back to some of those after we finish the presentations. So finally, I'd like to welcome Lee Haycoop, who is the Manager Landscape Master Developer and Design Team at Homes England. And she is going to be presenting on the need for clear planning requirements to enable developers to cost and implement resilience through tree and green infrastructures. So hello, Lee. It's good to see you again. I can see your presentation. If you can put it into full screen mode.
It should be going into full screen mode now.
It just sometimes takes a minute to come through.
Takes a moment, yeah, its own sweet time.
Yeah.
Thank you for the introduction. Yes, very interesting set of speakers so far. My title is slightly different, and my role is slightly different, actually.
Lee, we've got your note. It's not seeming to be full screen.
Yeah. We are seeing the presenter's notes.
Oh no.
So
it's reversed.
Yes.
How do I do that? Because
I think you can do it at the top. Let me just have it expand.
For me, it's showing.
If you go to display settings.
Yep.
The top left-hand corner and drag that down. You should be able.
Swap presenter view and slideshow.
That's it. That's the one.
Okay.
That's it. Perfect. Thank you.
Great. Now you're going to be looking at my neck because I got to look up my bigger screen to read my notes. Yes, so I have this question that was asked of me. Clear planning requirements. Well, I'm not a planner. So I've been asking a lot of people, been talking to quite a lot of people. I work at Homes England in the Master Development and Design team. And my background is landscape architecture. I'm the landscape person, small team, urban design, movement, highways, and not highways, that's not what I mean, but movement strategies and landscape and urban design, which covers most things. And I should say we support our colleagues. Is what we're there to do about quality design. We use Building for a Healthy Life at Homes England, and it was developed partly by Homes England. It's well accepted, easy to use. It's in the NPP, and about 50% of landscape authorities, I think, have it as something they should use. And you can see here the how much, the number of categories that are about. Green infrastructure, including trees, the three categories there: integrated neighbourhoods, distinctive places, and streets for all. They move with different planning stages. So first of all, sort of acquisition, secondly, outline planning, thirdly, reserve matters. At Homes England, we have, in the last couple of years, we've been developing substantially our sustainability approach, and these outcomes, this outcomes wheel, as we call it, is the graphic that was produced, and it's, you know, it is in a roundel like so many others because they're interrelated. That won't surprise you. Nature is just one of them, but we all know that it has a lot to do with just about all the others on that wheel. How is it going to be enforced in Homes England? We have a passport that is just starting. I say just is starting. It has started last year, but is still sort of in the starting stages, I suppose, accompanying every project right from acquisition through to post people inhabiting it. Really is the aim, and the passport will be something that that all these categories on the sustainable placemaking outcomes wheel will be addressed, will be talked about, written about, and it will follow through their development, where sometimes, you know, things have to change because things do change, made better or maybe, you know, kind of chipped away at. That's going to be recorded, so it's not just going to be forgotten about. That's the idea behind that. Now, so I've been talking to a lot of colleagues, actually people inside and outside Homes England, about this question: clear planning requirements enable developers to cost and implement resilient trees and green infrastructure. I mean, I came up with my own sort of first thoughts, but anyway, one colleague, an ecologist, was very busy, so he asked AI, and this is a summary of what AI said, and it won't surprise you, I suppose, that, you know, the level playing field idea is going to be a good thing because it will bring consistency to it. There won't be the last minute demands for green infrastructure. Conversely, there should be better forecasting and less sort of value engineering. There should be cost benefits, better data, better forecasting, fewer planning revisions, saving time and money, enabling early engagement with suppliers, and also benefits for the site and the region and other things like this. So I was wondering, is that really, you know, is that really what's happening? Well, I can start off with a good example of a Homes England project at Brookley in Sussex. Not just what AI says, but an example where there was clear planning direction and it has flowed through and good green infrastructure is being delivered. And this is where the design guide was very clear. It's a very big site, very big project, 3,500 new homes, 3 new schools, 3 new parks, 3 neighbourhood centres, an employment space, active travel infrastructure, part of which is what's called the Green Link, I think is that what it's called. I mean, the stats are quite impressive. So, for example, 82 hectares of strategic green infrastructure, which is 44% of the total area of development. So that's really impressive stuff. Earlier in the programme for Brookley, BNG wasn't statutory, but conversations with the local authority meant that they said, yeah, let's do 10% BNG here. It's one of those pre-statutory sites, and that was agreed. Anyway, it's predicted to provide 23%, which is very impressive, I think. And that's, I mean, it was blessed with a lot of wonderful stuff on the site, a lot of great you know, woodland and streams and ponds. But they're doing this by, you know, making those habitats better. I don't like the word enhance, because that sounds a little bit like icing on the cake and just making things a little bit better. And I know it's very difficult to use the word improve because ecologists apply that to grassland and that means a bad thing. So I've used the word augment here. But anyway, improving habitats, woodland and woodland buffers, widening those hedgerows, and also extending the Beadlands Nature Reserve. That's a very good story. But it's not always so. There are quite a lot of examples. I picked out just 3 projects and 3 little bits of those projects where there are conflicting policies in our current planning system, and this makes for difficulties. Or, you know, maybe it's not just the planning system, but highways are seeming to travel their own road, pardon the pun. So in the illustration there, this was about a development that was for 1,500 homes. There was a clear will from everybody to provide a community connected to nature, and that was running through all the master plans and so on. The road needed widening for all the extra car journeys that were going to be happening. And highways wanted to chop down the trees. If you can see that median strip, it took a great deal of work to agree with highways that there was this alternative and they should make sort of unidirection roads around the trees to save the trees. I don't know why. Well, the reason the project manager told me was highways. Local highways authorities were convinced that people were going to drive into the trees, which is a horrible thing to happen. But anyway. Second example here is where there was a tree officer in the local authority who wanted a very high proportion of native trees, but for some reason that wasn't clearly communicated. Didn't seem to be a standard requirement. Not quite sure why not. They came in quite late, and what that meant was the planting design and the schedule were amended. Of course, we can ask other questions too, about the tree officer's knowledge and when did they last do their CPD on the heat and climate and so on. So there's, oops, sorry, back to that was didn't mean to jog there. Third example here is where there was a clear SPD, and that should have flowed through to the required design code, but there was a great deal of trouble translating that in the code. And this because of people, the sub-consultants' shortcomings. What happened was it was vague and non-committal. It wasn't a code, and it was really poor on the landscape content. I have to, give sympathy to that particular sub-consultant for the pressure he was receiving from the consortium. It's not easy handling those situations, but still. So the solution to that was you cut that bit off and you get a new sub-consultant in and you start again. But, so that should have been quite clear. It wasn't. Sam Rosillo, one of our project managers, he says, oh, that's the planning system. You're always trying to balance different views and get a planning balance. I'm going to talk quite a bit about Sheffield, partly because it's very interesting and I live here. But I needed to talk to a lot of people to find out a lot more about it for this presentation. You may have heard of Zach Tudor. He was instrumental in the Greater Green Project, which is very well known and very well photographed. I see it in lots of presentations. He had been working with the Sheffield City Council for, I think, around 20 years. And he talks about the Peace Gardens project being a turning point here. It's city centre. It was about the demolition of a building called the Egg Box, leaving a space right in the centre of the city. And consultants, did a master plan, and lovely paving, very hard and all that. But the in-house teams thought, well, actually, not sure we like that. This was in the 1990s, and Meadowhall had, recently opened, so it was, city centre was in decline, industrial decline, and so on, and that retail leakage to Meadowhall, although it might have been seen as a negative, I think we're now looking at it as a positive, because we don't need to have it city centre. It's all up there. So the thinking was, let's have something different. A culturally rich and diverse and interactive city centre. Let's do something different with the planting, deep borders, rich planting. And of course, the knowledge put into that came from studying at Sheffield University under the likes of James Hitchmer, Nigel Dunnett and others. Zach Tudor is really extremely knowledgeable about planting. But there were no policies. There were strategies that they wrote, but there was no time to write a policy. The team was very effective and very busy. They were writing funding bids. So they had the high quality design principles. And Zach's comment there is that, you know, that scientific ecological knowledge underpinning the planting was really crucial. But over a number of years, around 20 years, you know, people move on, they retire, they go to other jobs. The Greater Green had been delivered very, very successfully. And now we're in a situation where I don't know what size the team is in there, but that particular team has moved on. And I do know that the latest part of the Greater Green has, you know, is having to use consultants and has used a design and build contract. And that means that, well, the result of that is that it's not great. The check dams, I think, are pretty non-functional, completely different design. There's much poorer planting. The weed infestation was obvious before planting, and I'm waiting to see what happens, you know, as I walk past it. Zach says, you know, if understanding isn't embedded in people, the delivery mechanism will dilute its quality. And I think that's showing there. Homes England is involved in 3 big projects at campus, in Sheffield, Moorfoot, Furnace Hill and Neepsend, and Station Campus. And each of those has its own development framework. So there's no overall policy, but the council is making a specific development framework for each area, and that is giving clear green infrastructure principles. I was talking to Mark Canning about this, who's the program manager, project manager for this for Moorfoot, and he says, yes, it's really useful because those development frameworks are going to be used as a procurement tool. They're going to be watching when the bids come in, what's being chipped away. And he also cited the dreadful Amy debacle of the trees, chopping down so many trees in Sheffield, saying the flip side, the positive side of that now is, and he calls it, Sheffield Council, he said, have got PTSD about those trees. That has now really fired them up to say, right, we're going to strongly resist any dilution of what they're requiring, and they're quite strong about that. So that is all sounding like a really good story. So there's been a lot of another manager who's working on one of the other projects talked about so much clarity emerging actually just in conversations with Sheffield City Council planners. And you know, I suppose this is a reflection of the development frameworks being different for each area. So Furnace Hill and Neepsend, which is basically industrial heritage areas, says there's going to not be so much green infrastructure there. And I haven't read the development framework, but I was thinking, okay, you know, question mark. What's that going to be like walking down those streets, you know, when we have 40 degrees heat in future summers, just because, well, really primarily because of visual aesthetics. You know, I get it, but on the other hand, question mark. And in terms of clarity as well, Amy, who've got that contract for the streets for 25 years, they've been very clear that every single tree, if a developer wants it to be adopted, there has to be a commuted sum of £12,000 per tree. That sounds pretty high, doesn't it? So, question mark on that. Yeah, it is clarity. It's good people don't have to talk about it. And apparently they have also a list of trees and a lot of other guidance on what exactly they expect. It was heartening to talk to Jane Houghton at Natural England. I'd been curious to know more about the local authorities, 3 local authorities embedding Natural England Green Infrastructure Framework into their local plans. And I wanted to know how that had come about. Had that come about through conversations, or, you know, were there people there who got it and other local authorities who didn't? Just as a reminder about that Green Infrastructure Framework, it has 5 standards: green infrastructure strategy, accessible green space, urban nature recovery, urban green factor, and the urban tree canopy. And Jane mentioned, she talked quite a bit about the urban greening factor, that is really much liked by councils because it has so much clarity. The quantity is 40% for resi, 30% commercial, the cover types are clear, and you don't need to employ a consultant to work out what you need to deliver. And then she was talking about Nature, Towns and Cities programme, which again is just, it's about inspiring and guiding, and it certainly inspired me. And I think for me on this particular topic, what it does is it cascades from the high level sort of policy strategy type level down to delivery through, through to communities, not forgetting evaluation and monitoring being absolutely key. And that is so heartening to hear about. But I also asked her about people, individual peoples. And I think you can't underestimate the importance of people and their knowledge and their interest. So she mentioned that, in Poole, there seemed to be latent capacity there, noting that Poole is one of the local authorities that's embedding the Natural England Green Infrastructure Framework. There was latent capacity there from a previous Natural England programme, so those people were still there. Future Parks Accelerator programme. Essex had a fantastic landscape design team and there were champions there. Portsmouth, their green infrastructure strategy was driven by someone in the public health team. So it doesn't have to be the usual suspects, but people, it seems, are very important. So I'd say in summary, clarity does seem vital, like the urban greening factor, and not having conflicting policies, and not forgetting people, their knowledge and commitment. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. That was a super presentation. I really enjoyed seeing some of the work in Sheffield. I just every time I go up to Sheffield, I'm inspired by the quality of workmanship. Some areas seem to be very well maintained and managed, and others not so well. And it is interesting how a place can deteriorate very quickly if it's not properly maintained, even if it's beautifully detailed in the first instance.
And actually, I might add just to that point about the maintenance, that's to do with the plant palette being designed by someone less knowledgeable than some other parts of it.
That's very interestingly, after our discussions a week or so ago about planting knowledge. So, yes. I'll just pick up this question that Sue's asked for you. Sue, I don't know if you'd like to ask it yourself.
This is my nature recovery one. I seem
Yes.
to be asking quick. Yeah. So I was just quite interested, Lee, in whether one of the things that's been exercising me is we've got local nature recovery strategies, the GI, Natural England's GI framework. Do you get the sense that they're all joining up, or are we just getting unconnected pockets of things happening without that kind of comprehensive connectivity that we actually need to achieve?
I haven't, I don't know in detail about the various nature recovery strategies. Actually, my son is working on one for this region, Simca, South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority. But from a Homes England point of view, I would say we are hopeful that they will, and that there will be another thing that will be there to respond to from a site is how a site is going to, help the nature recovery strategy, even if they're not specifically required to, but they should do.
I had one other little question, if I can. So when we had a really interesting meeting with Zach and Judah, didn't we? And he showed us what he had done and why and how. And it does make you think, you need to really design with maintenance and aftercare in mind. I think
Definitely.
That's actually something that we need to build into a kind of requirements for people undertaking work, not
Yes.
just what your monitoring program is, but actually can you demonstrate that it's designed so aftercare can be achievable, because too often it doesn't happen because it's perceived as too expensive to undertake.
Yes. I mean, I don't know how many local authorities do this now, but many years ago, in my first landscape architecture job, it was frustrating to see that the local authority this was Lincoln City Council, had a set amounts of money against set types of planting. And I knew that I could design a mixed border or herbaceous border, perennial border, to be low maintenance, but they hadn't realized that you could do that yet. And so that was frustrating. So, there's it sort of goes back to that. But does that answer your question properly? Not quite. But I think,
I'm forever wanting to tell people what to do. So could you please design with maintenance and aftercare in mind, so we get things right at the outset,
It needs to be taught as well. I know Sheffield University do attend to that, but a lot don't. I mean, it's about plant communities, and woodland being a plant community. And I don't know enough about making a woodland in a large space. I do have my little tiny little woodland garden at the bottom of my garden that interests me hugely, trying to get that understory and the different layers up. But it's about plant communities, and once you understand plants really well and their elbows, so to speak, how the light levels they need, the moisture they need, and how they're going to compete with other plants, then you can do that. You can do your mixes so that they are literally have one cut a year. And then you would go through and look out for other stuff that's seeding in that's going to be difficult, like thistles and things like that. But that's the aim, in my opinion.
Thank you very much, Lee. I think we've got back to the end of all the individual presentations now. So thank you very much for your presentation. I'd like to invite back the other speakers, if you could switch your cameras on, please. Wake you all up. We all there? Eugene, Dale. Well, we get started. I'm sure he'll join us in a minute. There's been quite a lot of debate and conversation in the chat box, and I think between us, we'll try and go through it. But I would just like to perhaps kick conversation off around all these written strategies, policies that are at national level, they're at local authority level, sometimes they're at developer level, and they're all pretty much saying the same thing. But do they really achieve what they set out to do? Or is it just, do the developers and the planners just pay lip service to them? So I'll throw that one out there, if one of you would like to pick that up and start discussing it, and we'll have a look to see what other questions there are.
I think I'm the only one here at the moment, aren't I?
I'm here.
Oh, there you go. Well,
Joanna.
you go, Eugene.
Dale's here as
Thank
well
you.
now.
Thank goodness.
Well, I'll just mention quickly that during my initial research, I'm yet to find a really kind of comprehensive report on performance of a strategy. A lot of documents report how they're going to monitor and review and what the KPIs are, but I'm yet to find a kind of review document. I'm not saying they're not out there, but that's just what I've encountered so far.
So I'll dive in and confess that we had a quite extensive action plan and review plan for our tree strategy. None of it ever happened because the staff was cut by about 50% in 2014. So I think the follow-up to strategies is hard to manage. I think you're always, I was certainly pushed to put in lots of actions and lots of reviews, and we were going to report every year on loads of KPIs. So if you're writing a strategy, I'd be cautious about how much reviewing and KPIs you put in. Maybe just focus on the really important ones, because we had so many, we never actually did any.
The Cambridge Citywide Tree Strategy is due to be updated next year, and we're going through the process of starting that now, so that it will be, because it ran to 26, so that it will be updated. Because of all the so especially some of the citizen science and the various projects we've done on canopy cover, and with the use of various tools, we've managed to, we are looking at canopy cover. So we knew what our canopy cover was before. We had a goal of 19% to jump to 19%. We can assess that canopy cover again, and that will be part of the strategy to show within our second citywide tree strategy, which is the urban forest strategy, whether or not we've been successful in any of the things. So it's definitely, it's there, it's possible, it's something that we're definitely looking at, and that's going to be happening next year, or up to next year.
Thanks, Joanna. Do you think the issues around costs to the local authority and making officers and other consultants redundant, all the cost savings that are going on, are having an impact on tree strategies?
Massively.
Yeah.
I mean, it's yeah, massively. Every local authority is finding it difficult to find monies. Local authorities go through various changes, which make it complicated. And I think external funding. I sort of tried to highlight the importance of external funding, which I think is key to being able to achieve the aspirations of local authorities, because of that reduction in central government funding. You have to look for external funding from other areas to be able to achieve the aspirational aims.
Thanks, Joanna. So I can see that there's a question from Sarah, which you've highlighted in the chat, and I see Sarah's appeared. Would you like to ask the panel your question, Sarah?
Hello, Sarah. I'm speaking from West Lothian Council in Scotland. It's really more of an observation, but I've been working for quite a long time in local government, and there used to be a lot more landscape architects, and we used to do a lot more, or have money for like capital works. So you had more specialist people throughout the service. And now we're really down to having, currently we have one landscape architect who works kind of in another field. We had 3 ecologists appointed recently out of one of the councillors' keenness, which means that when you get a new housing development landscape management plan, it's assessed by ecologists. I'm so old, I nominally work as a landscape architect, but I don't actually have the qualifications or the specific accreditation. That's problematic, because you get things like say a tree screen on the south side of housing directly backed onto, say, a short gardens, which become shorter now that they're with densification. They may be ecologically sound, but if you're a landscape architect, you'd go, how do you access them for maintenance? And also, most people don't want to be living next to, a solid shelter belt of trees, which blocks sun, causes all sorts of issues. Yeah, thank you. That's my.
Thanks, Sarah. Perhaps I could ask the panel if they would. Perhaps we could start with you, Dale, if you've got. If you can respond to those comments, please. Hello, Dale.
I'm fighting. Sorry, I was fighting. Right. The mute button. I kept clicking it and it kept clicking back. Yeah, I think there are times when we probably do get it wrong. We get trees too close to developments, and I can appreciate that people don't want people don't necessarily want a huge shelter belt right at the bottom of their garden, overhanging and causing shade and stuff. But at the same time, well, certainly in Ealing, we're under pressure to get trees in kind of wherever we can. So there's almost always conflict between trees and people on the vast majority of our sites.
Thanks, Dale. Anybody else want to contribute?
I think probably just I agree completely, and it's a question really of creating the space, and that's the difficult thing, isn't it? That you have a development that for viability reasons, if nothing else, stakeholder reasons, it's boundary to boundary development, and then when there is a little bit of green space left over, the token trees will go in, and I think what is key is to creating the space within any development, and actually providing for trees that are actually going to be of value, and any a layout, in my opinion, would be better if it created the space for one large tree rather than shoehorning in 3 Amelanchias along the frontage, that are probably going to be a problem anyway, but one large tree that could be close to a boundary, because that way you're saving on space, because the tree is going to be partially overhanging the highway potentially, but yeah, creating that space is, I think, essential to the sustainability. But that space also needs to be in a location that is going to be sustainable through future development, because trees do take so long to establish, and development these days just doesn't last all that long. 20-30 years, and you've got buildings coming down and being replaced again. Well, the trees that were planted to mitigate that development aren't established yet. They haven't anywhere near met their potential, which is why it is so important to create that space and make sure that that space is in a protectable location through future development.
It's a really good point you make. I don't know how many projects I've worked on. We've actually gone back 20-30 years later, and exactly what you said's happened. The trees have gone and we planted them first time round. Sue, you've got your hand up.
I know, because I can't find the yellow one. So just before I bring Mark in, I was just thinking, people sort of don't want shade and don't want this, but actually we've got climate change. And I do think that there needs to be a pressure for more climate responsive design, and that shade that people appear to hate now, they may absolutely love soon, because I don't know what everybody else is finding, but I'm here in West Wales, the sun is out. The sun is particularly bright. It's brighter than I ever remember it at this time of year. I'm so grateful to my trees that are nicely, gently shading my window instead of, putting me in the full blaze of the sun. So I do think we need climate responsive design. I also think there is, thank goodness, a move in the built environment that buildings must have a longer life than we've been giving them. The 30-year life will not, it cannot continue to be the way forward, because it's just so carbon intensive and irresponsible to do that. Anyway, that's me just chatting away. But Mark Serrett had a good point. Mark, do you want to tell us?
Yeah, thank you, Sue. Yeah, Mark Serrett, Surrey County Council. It was just thinking through from Cornwall Council's presentation last meeting, looking at increasing canopy cover and sort of reflecting what Dale and Joanna were saying around having a policy rather than a strategy. Now, I now sit in the flooding team. So the flooding team doesn't always get into pre-apps. I'm trying to think how the tree pit suds can be combined with the BNG, can be combined with the canopy increase within a sole policy, because they're 3 different people in 3 different buildings, and I'm just not seeing them coming through in planning applications that I'm, validating or approving from a flooding point of view. I'm just wondering if anyone's applied those policies, because it's lacking and it's screaming out for it.
Has anybody Would anybody like to take that question?
I don't know about. I didn't see. I'm afraid the Cornwall the last presentation. So, but we do. I do get involved in pre-apps as a tree officer in planning, and there is significant collaboration within the built natural environment team, so that drainage, sustainable drainage, ecology, and arboriculture can all be considered. We definitely highlight that there are conflicts, although they complement each other. They also have conflicts. So if you've got sustainable urban drainage, then where are you going to put the tree? And depending on the type of drainage you're using, it doesn't work. You can't have trees there. And then also with BNG, you can't have the trees necessarily, because that's not what was there on site. The value of the site isn't necessarily all trees. So you're conflicting, trying to meet BNG, but also plant the same amount of trees. So, but we do have policies that run over in the local plan that complement each other within the local plan, that allows for that. But obviously, again, it really just does come down to, is there space available for all of those things, and making sure that that space is available for all the important environmental concerns on a site.
Thank you, Joanna. Lee, do you want to come in at that point?
Thanks. Yes, I actually can't find my little hand that I should raise down at the bottom. I mean, I think trees can be delivered in SUDs. They are delivered in SUDs very successfully, and there doesn't have to be a conflict. So it's probably sort of more about having a sustainability team that's going to work those three elements together effectively, which, as you're saying at the moment, they seem to be a bit sort of too independent of each other. But of course, one of the thing about SUDs and doing it well, and doing it with good green infrastructure is getting in early into the whole design stage and having conversations with or before engineers say we must underpipe it all and take it away to a pit and corner. But that which I see all too often done, and shock, we don't like it. It's not. It scores badly at Homes England when we come and do the Building for a Healthy Life reviews that we do. It's so, that it's sort of knowledge. The engineers don't know enough to know that there's another way of doing it. They know their numbers and everything very well, and but yes, so cross-fertilization and joining together needs to happen.
Thanks, Lee. Emma, you've been very patient. Can I bring you in now?
Of course. I think I'm probably going to say something very similar to how Lee started, which is that we just need to try and get all these different strategies working together, because trees have a really important role in climate resilience, and perhaps this is something that Eugene can look into as part of his PhD research. So I think there's a real opportunity to watch this space on that. Lee, you also mentioned that plant maintenance isn't always part of teaching at university. I think sustainable urban drainage isn't always part of engineering curriculums as well. And so I think we can try and, there is work happening to try and bring it in, but because we're accredited by the Institution of Civil Engineers, we also need to kind of get all these big organizations on board as well. So it's like turning a big ship, but I think it will happen.
It's turning a big ship, and we have to ask, we have to talk about the urgency here. The urgency of the climate crisis, say, why have we got to wait for these big ships to turn? It's so frustrating, isn't it? But yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah.
Thanks. There's a couple of things I think we could do with covering off here before we finished. Marina Goodyear's made a really good point about building regs. Marina, would you like to ask your question or to make your comments to the panel, because it's really interesting about the fact that they building regs don't consider trees as a source of shade. Marina, are you there? Oh, yes, you are. Hello. Hi.
Hi there.
Welcome.
Wasn't expecting to pipe up on this call. That's exciting. Yeah, I just wanted to note, yeah, absolutely. Trees as a source of shade could be amazing. I'm really fortunate as well. I've got south-facing window here and tons of trees shading me. But so there was a new part of building regulations introduced in about 2021-22, which is Part O, and that for the first time addresses overheating risk mitigation. Unfortunately, that does not take into account any shade from trees, which is really frustrating because obviously it can be so valuable. But also I do see the point because they could die, as it's been mentioned, or they could be chopped down, as has also been mentioned on this call. There is another industry overheating risk mitigation methodology called SIBC TM52 in homes, or TM59, no, sorry, TM52 in non-residential, TM59 in others. That might be worth looking into. I'm not quite sure whether or not that allows you to take account of trees as a source of shade. But if you had a local plan policy that sort of qualitatively asks for overheating risk mitigation, that might be the place where you could get that, get a bit of a foothold to be able to reward that sort of design when you see that coming through from developers. But you will have to, if you are trying to write a policy like that, you will have to get it past this annoying bit of national government policy, which says that you shouldn't repeat what is in Part O. So you'd have to kind of make the argument that you're not repeating what's in Part O, you're doing something slightly different. And that's all I wanted to add to that.
It could be it could be a way of protecting trees, because
Exactly.
the local
Yes.
authority could say they are
Yeah.
helping to reduce overheating, which we know is
Yeah.
a huge problem.
Absolutely.
And I think that was the point I was going to jump on as you did. It is a reason for protecting trees, isn't it? And in fact, I did a project in the 1990s where we designed hot and cold elevations to buildings, and the hot elevations, which obviously faced south, were all screened with trees. Now the cooling wouldn't happen in year one, but now the trees look as though they've been there for longer than the building has, and they're actually doing their job, and will probably be there long after the building has been readapted several times and then probably replaced. So I think those are really important points I think we could do with following up on. The other, Sue, you've got your hand up again.
Yeah, but no, you go ahead with yours.
I was going to say the other one is that there's lots of comments coming out from the viewers around having people in local authorities having the right skill set to be able to deal with the planning applications, whether it's the right tree officer, whether it's landscape architects, that some of the projects are not being properly dealt with because the people who are reviewing them for the planning department are not equipped to do that. I wonder if I could throw that question out to the panel. Who would like to pick that one up first? In your experience, Dale.
I'm not sure anyone's going to want to dive on that one.
It's a bit political, I know.
I could be non-political, if you like, and just sort of starting it off while the others think what they want to say. I was at the London Borough of Tower Hamlets in the regeneration team for 12 months with public practice. And when I was leaving, well, I did quite a bit of work with development management, and they needed my skills. They didn't have anybody. They didn't have a landscape architect. They didn't have an ecologist. And I revised their standard conditions, which really were just so ancient. But yes, so they wanted those skills. They needed those skills, but they didn't have them and they weren't going to get them.
Yeah, thanks for that, Dale. Do you want to come into that? Come in. You were trying to speak.
I don't think I was trying to speak. I was trying to.
Eugene, well, maybe I'll go to Eugene.
Yeah.
He hasn't said much, but
yeah, just a quick comment. I think even like the LTOA trying to get young people into the role of the tree officer, and I think the skill sets that you're talking about with this like really in-depth knowledge about planting and specification comes with great experience, and it's this difficult situation where we would love people with those skill sets. We would also love young people coming into the role, and it's this kind of bit of a trade-off. And then obviously we can talk about upskilling within the workforce. That takes money. So it's yeah, I know there's research and work into how to create pathways into the job of a tree officer for younger people, and I think the trade-off is that you might have to upskill, or there's that lack of maybe time in the role.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, and I think also my personal belief is, unless there are statutory requirements to include landscape architects on design teams, and that if a landscape plan is produced as part of a planning application, it has to be prepared by a landscape architect. Unless it becomes a statutory requirement, I don't think there'll be any incentive to employ landscape architects in local authority when they're so strapped for cash. Sue, you've been very patient.
Well, there was just one point that Elizabeth Beaumont raised. I don't know if she's here, but anyway, it was just, should there be fees for tree applications as a source of helping local authorities have the funding then to actually, be able to do their enforcement and monitoring and everything else relating to trees? Question for Cambridge.
There already are.
Oh, are there?
There already are quite a lot of fees for development applications.
But not specifically for trees.
Not specifically for trees, no.
Yeah, I think it's different with the tree work application. Obviously, yes, planning applications, there are considerable fees for planning applications, and then there are fees associated with the discharge of condition, but there's no requirement. I mean, there is no fee for an application to carry out works to a tree protected by a TPO or to serve a 211 notice. It's an interesting question. Yes, it's a great way, isn't it? Wouldn't it be lovely if local authorities could actually get money from that service? But you need to look at it at the flip side as well, though. I remember Jake Tibbets when he was at Islington. I don't know if he's at Islington anymore, but Jake Tibbets once did a survey asking people why, would they have a tree in their front garden, especially people that I think in conservation areas. And, a lot of people said, well, we don't want a tree because the local authority might put a tree preservation order on it. Now, if there's a tree preservation order on a tree, but it doesn't cost you anything to make an application, then, perhaps people would be happier with there being a tree preservation order on a tree within their garden. But if they have to apply for permission in order to carry out works every time, then I think there's going to be a negative connotation associated with tree preservation. It's also that the point of it is that it is a land charge. An Englishman's home is his castle, except when it comes to you've got a tree in your garden, you're not allowed to do anything with it. But it's my garden, it's my house. I ought to be able to do what I want to do with it. Well, yes, to a certain extent, but that's not taking into consideration public amenity. But having a tree preservation order is to a lot of people a negative thing. And I think that putting a charge on that, as nice as it would be for the local authority, would be a negative connotation. And it does, there are implications, I think, for people's rights as homeowners. You inherit a tree with a tree preservation order, or the council just suddenly turn up and slap a tree preservation order on you, and you then have to pay money if you just want to remove a few low branches.
Yeah, I think the point's really well made there, Joanna. We're really beginning to run out of time now, I think. So I think we'll end it there. Thank you very much for those of you who've attended this afternoon, and for your contribution. It's been really thoughtful and an engaging discussion, and a heartfelt thanks to our fantastic speakers for sharing their experience. Just a quick reminder that the presentations, the chat and the recording of today's session will be available on the TDAG website very soon. And before I hand over to Sue, I'd just like to plug the Landscape Institute's West Midlands branch are holding an urban climate walk in Birmingham on Thursday. We'll be starting with a talk at BCU, and all the details are on Eventbrite. So I'll just leave that there. So over to you, Sue.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you very much for chairing that so well, as ever, and thank you, everybody. So just to say, our next seminar is on the 10th of June, same time, on resilience to pests and diseases. Remember, all these seminars are in response to sort of suggestions that come from people who attend them. So if you have ideas, please don't hesitate to send them in to us. Our November seminar is going to be on research. And what we're trying to do is encourage people, particularly at the early stages in their research careers. So it doesn't mean they have to be young. It's just that they're beginning the research aspect of their careers to actually submit abstracts, because there's going to be a small financial prize attached to that. And we'll put details in a newsletter. And we've got some first steps guides coming on, so look at the website. And we've got a TDAG LinkedIn page, which I think Dee keeps quite active. I'm not very good at. So I'll close the formal meeting, thanking everybody. I will stay online for the next 10 or 15 minutes, probably with Emma and Dee, in case anybody's got any more business things that they'd like to raise with us. And so otherwise, I'll say thank you very much to everybody. I will now save the chat because I'll add that to the website. And we hope to see you all again on the 10th of June.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For everyone.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.